And welcome to our community. Susie Thomas here with you this morning, wrapping up our adoption week. It's been quite a week, and we're going to end it in fine fashion with Howard and Jill Taylor to adoptive parents. Good morning to both of you.
Good morning, Susie.
Thanks. Let's I'll start with your story. You've had domestic adoption, and you've also done some things internationally that are so cool. So let's talk with you a little bit about your story first. Who wants to start?
Jill will start.
Well, we began our marriage with anticipation of kind of a large family, and after we had our first daughter and tried for that second child, it just didn't happen. So we began to open our mind to the possibilities of adoption. I think, Howard, you were just talking before the show about the fact that we got on the list for Holt International, and in the midst of that, managed to get pregnant and lost that little one at about 6 months along. And that was pretty devastating, and got this incredibly wonderful call from a friend in California, which is where I was from, and Howard and I had lived there for a while. And so anyway, that call was to say we have a woman who wants to place for adoption, and she's very interested in the possibility that you might be the couple. So we absolutely said yes, and packed our bags when the time came and flew out to California, and ended up at that point waiting for Doug to be born. And when he was born, we laughed about the fact that it was a really incredible winter out there that year. Snow, rain, hail. And
in
we
California?
Yes, and we got a little sun in California. So anyway, that was the beginning. And it was just wonderful. Our little 4-year-old was with us when we went out, and we met the birth mom prior to Doug's birth. And I think she fell in love with Kari. And that was really sweet. She said she was a little afraid of, I can't remember whether it was you or me.
I think it was me she was afraid of.
The birth mom was?
Yeah.
His gruffness.
You're not that scary. That's what I was wondering. What could have brought that on?
But it was really a good experience with her then, and I think she felt safe with us. We didn't do a lot of communicating after that. We went back to Indiana, and actually that's not long after that, when Doug was 2, is when we moved back to California, and very close to her. And we chose not to reveal that we were there. So it was probably 17. Doug was just turning 17 by the time he met his birth mother, and of course fell in love with her and the 2 girls that she had. And so it was just a really, it was good timing. A lot of good things got revealed for Doug about his structure and his height. He didn't think he was going to ever be tall. He's like 6'2.5" or whatever now. So whatever. It was all assured by his birth mother that this was going to be where the spurt would take place anyway.
She said by the time you're a junior in high school, it'll just be unbelievable. And it was. We were marking against the wall, and every 2 weeks buying new jeans and everything that went along with it. And he just
sore
shot
legs.
up.
He had,
which helped him a great deal in terms of his own self-esteem as a guy.
Talk about their relationship as siblings, and then I know a third child came along. So how did that whole dynamic work?
Yes, Katie was born. They were 19 months apart. They were so close and got into so much trouble together. I'll tell you, it was hard to keep those two because what one didn't think of, the other one did. But it was a lot of fun. The kids did really well together. I think as we watched them grow and get older, they were more like pairing up in twos, which often happens with a third child in that mix. But I think by the time they were ready to be, and Doug chose not to go to college. He joined the Marines for a short time. And the kids all had different interests and didn't seem to really bond. I think as adults is when it's really been exciting to watch them come back together, and they're all in totally different areas of life and different regions. And when we get together, it's just fun to watch them. Doug will, you'll you'll see him with his arm around his older sister and giving her a hard time for doing something, and she's laughing. He's quite the comedian, by the way. He's just really a lot of fun, and so is
You
our.
got that from me.
Yes, of course,
I think.
he did.
Yeah, there's nature and nurture.
That's right. That's right.
So a lot of fun.
There's something very special about the mother-son relationship and the father-daughter relationship. There's also something very special about that father-son and the mentoring. Talk about how not just being the adopted child in the family, but the son. How did that fit in?
Yeah, that's really a good point. I think Doug felt surrounded, and as a matter of fact, he was, by Kari on one side, Katie on the other, age-wise. But I think he did know that he had kind of a special place in terms of being the son. And if you fast forward, what Jill's talking about, Doug was born in 1979, in the last century, the last millennium. And you fast forward now, and although Kari has children, they have a different last name. And Katie's not married at this point. And so Doug has 2 boys who, in fact, carry on the Taylor name. And when I think back about and there are worse things than not having the name carry on. I mean, don't get me wrong. But we wouldn't have any grandkids with the Taylor name had we not adopted Doug right out of the hospital in 1979. And so, now when we babysit, and he has another daughter as well, but when we say babysit, do we get the boys? So they're the boys now. But again, both with the last name of Taylor. So it's kind of fun that way. When they were growing up, there was a great deal of rivalry. They were, I think, very competitive. And just going back to one of those things Jill said about how close Doug and Katie were, to this day, you can't mention a line out of Never-Ending Story or Princess Bride, but what the two of them won't carry on the dialogue between themselves and just, as if the movie were going on. So there are always those things.
Only mostly dead.
Yeah, mostly dead. When you get back to holidays and such, when that does really become a great deal of fun. But there would have been a huge hole in our lives without Doug and without a son.
Yeah. When you think about it, though, aren't a lot of the things that you're talking about, that's just part of family, and that's part of siblings anyway, and a lot of siblings do grow closer once they are adults. It's hard to pinpoint what of that is due to adoption and what of that is just family stuff. You ever think about that?
When Doug was born, I remember trying to discern, how do we handle this? How do we where do we ever begin to talk about it with him? We had a great pediatrician. When I went in and explained I was concerned about that, and she just said, you know what? You love him just like you would love him if you birthed him, and you love your other kids just like you would love them if you adopted them. So you're going to talk to him always about what a gift he is, that how much you love that his mother trusted you with him, and that his birth mother loved you, and Doug is yours 100%, and he's also blessed with a mother who loves him enough to have given him birth, and just a lot of neat things. And we never did hesitate with the adoption word. Used it, and as a matter of fact, our older than girl, who was 4 or 5 by the time she was doing this, playing dolls, would you'd be in a room by herself, and she'd be saying, "This baby just came home from the hospital, Mommy. I picked him up. Somebody had him, and I adopted him. Wow. And this little baby I gave birth to, and he is just such a stinker, And she would just play this game out, and I thought, that is so cool. Yeah. To her, it's either or, and it doesn't matter.
And it's all part of the family.
Yeah.
And he would introduce himself this way?
Yeah, one of the funny things that happened, Kari was playing soccer on a team on a Saturday morning, and she introduced one of her teammates to Doug, and she said, "This is my brother Doug." And Doug stood up and shook her hand, and he's a pretty little guy at this point, and he said, "Hi, I'm Doug, I'm adopted." And it's just one of those things that has resonated through the years, and every now and then he and I will go back and visit that and talk about it because he remembers it. But it was not a word that got stuck in our throats, and it was not a word that ever got stuck in his. Now, all of that to say it wasn't always the Brady Bunch. It wasn't always great fun. I mean, and if Doug were here, he would say too that there were challenges along the way. But as I've looked at it backwards now through the years, I look at it and say there are challenges on every street.
Exactly.
And whether adopted, whether adopted young, whether adopted older, whether birthed, whatever, life's not full of guarantees anyway.
Ever.
And so we struggle and we move forward, all of us.
Well, let's talk about those challenges, because I think you could be helpful to a lot of people right now by talking about some of those and how you addressed them.
I think one of the sweet things that happened for us, Susie, was that reconnection with his birth mom, meeting his half-sisters. It was good and it was difficult. So in all of that, we had to let our hands be very loose with him, let him make some decisions and make some choices. But it ended up with a strong relationship where when Doug was married here in the Canton area to a local young lady who's just amazing, we invited Trini, of course, to the wedding, and his sisters came, and she and I lit the mother candle together, mother of the groom. That was just a sweet opportunity for us to do that together, and
it was
we were grateful
amazing.
for it.
Was that the first you had reached out to her since his birth, or had there been some kind of a connection prior to that?
Yeah. We had sent information back and forth to each other. We would receive
through a
mutual friend. But it was the first time when she sent a Christmas card. It was with a picture of her two daughters, and her two daughters were named Carly and Casey, and our daughters were named Kari and Katie.
Oh my
and
goodness.
all of them started with K's. And then Doug, married a Chrissy. And so there's another K in there for you. But it was great to reconnect with her, and
he was about 17 when that reconnection initially
was he the one who
place.
said, I need to meet my birth mom? Did that come from him?
It came because she sent this letter, and we discussed, is this the right time? And it was a tough decision. It was a very tough decision. And I think that it was a hard road for him to navigate. Those are tough years when you're 17 in high school and struggling with some things. But he did well. He did well. In the long run, he surfaced through that. And again, it was a bumpy road at times with his other family. But he had a great experience through all of that, I think.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine that for the birth mother, that had to be an incredible moment to get to be in your son's wedding, to get that invitation. Has he ever talked about, from his perspective, what that was like to have birth mother, mother there together? Has he said what that was like for him?
He hasn't. He hasn't talked about that as much as clearly watching Doug navigate through that, and then being married himself, and then having his own children.
Yes.
Those things have been very interesting to watch. And in the midst of all that, I would just say, since I'm on this wonderful radio program, that he really developed as a Christ follower too. And so some of the things that might have been difficult and different in our two families, he has more embraced, and it's really been an interesting journey. I just have to say, it will always be an interesting journey. It's not going to be smooth, and it's not going to be all ditches unless you stop trusting God in all of it. So.
I think this is a great way to wind up this week, is to be talking about the analogy of adoption, as we know in families, and our adoption into the family of God.
Right.
And biblically, that adoption relationship is even stronger than the birth relationship, is it not? Can you touch on that?
Right. I think Paul did a really good job of talking about in the Roman law, if you adopted, that child could never be taken out of the will. If you had children that were born to you, you could remove them from the will.
That's right.
And I think that is because it is such a determination of the mind and the heart that you're going to walk into this with that relationship, and you can never honor God by stepping away from that. You know, you might discipline a birth child by saying you're gonna lose some ground here, buddy, if you don't behave, but you would never threaten that of a child that's been adopted. Just like God never threatens that with us as adopted heirs to the kingdom. You know, He loves us unconditionally, and of course that unconditional love for all of our kids. But yep. For sure, for your adopted child.
What a beautiful analogy. We've got to take a break, and that's a good place to do it. We'll be back after these words. You're listening to Our Community.